Good afternoon. Thank you for attending this, this session on the future of urban mobility. We have a lot of exciting subjects to cover here today. We're going to set the stage a little bit. How many of you have been stuck in traffic? Okay, and how many of you liked it? No? Oh,
we found it.
There's always the one person who says yes. But when we talk about the future of urban mobility, we're not talking about being stuck in traffic, are we? We're talking about being able to get around it. And at the same time, our cities have been built historically, they were built for the white male commuter traveling by car from the suburbs to downtown. But right now, we need to get around a little differently so that we're not stuck in traffic. In fact, the average American spends about 150 hours per year stuck in traffic in the country's major cities. So that's why I'm so excited to have people trying to build solutions here to discuss this subject today. And that's Josh Rasmussen from Monday Motorbikes and David Estrada from Bird Scooters. So I'd like to ask each of you, Josh first, what is this solution that you're building to urban congestion? How will Monday Motorbikes get us out of our cars and help decongest our city streets?
Thanks, Sarah. It's important to know what we do a little bit at Monday Motorbikes. So Monday Motorbikes was founded on a Monday in a garage in San Francisco. And our whole goal was to create something that exuded the experience of riding a cafe racer from the American 1960s, 1970s, but also reduced pollution because we made it fully electric, and also made it highly approachable because our bike has the aesthetic of a motorcycle, but doesn't have a license or registration requirement. Therefore, you can ride in the bike lane, you can park on the sidewalk. So our goal was to solve these problems that we knew motorcycles could solve, but also make it highly approachable so that anybody who was an aspirational rider that wanted to experience the thrill of two wheels could come on and feel excited about it. And that's what we created with Monday Motorbikes. And now we're based out of LA doing some really cool work there. Unfortunately, we just can't build at the scale of some companies like the one to my far right. And so I'd probably toss it back over to you, David, just to learn a little bit more about what you see the future of and how you're solving that problem.
Thank you. So thanks, everybody, for coming to this. It's exciting to be here and talk about the change that's happening in front of us. Who here has ridden a scooter around South by Southwest? Awesome. That's amazing. So 1 year ago, the scooters weren't here. And it's incredible because when you walk outside, you see that you have this mode of transportation available now that was not available just 1 year ago. And the scale of adoption in cities has been incredible. So I started out in transportation back in 2011 when I was the legal department head for Google X. And I walked in one day to meet with the folks who were working on some crazy new thing called self-driving cars. And at that time, it seemed crazy. It was a secret project. Nobody else was doing it. And it was a really exciting thing for me to think of a future where we could solve a major problem that we have here in America and around the world. And then I went on to Lyft and led government relations at Lyft for a couple of years and helped establish ride sharing. Everybody here is probably also using Lyft and Uber, which in 2013 didn't exist in terms of at least Lyft. And then I got involved in self-driving cars, not self-driving cars, but flying cars, something that Larry Page is working on. But throughout all of this, what I've really been searching for is what is the most elegant way we can finally get to get people moving through cities a lot faster. And so if you look at what Bird has done, just over a year ago, we launched in one city, Santa Monica. And people asked the question, is this going to just be a beach thing? And it was a valid question because it worked really well in Santa Monica, California. But the question was, could it work elsewhere? Well, if you fast forward a year, we're in 100 cities. There are a lot of competitors who have come along because the market adoption has been enormous.
Yeah, that's great. And how do you get people who are addicted to their cars out of them? How will your modes benefit not just cities and city streets and passengers and drivers, but businesses around certain neighborhoods? Don't people need to drive to shop?
The economics piece is really fun for me, and I know there's a couple studies, and you do work in urban transportation and mobility and planning, so you're the authority on this, so I appreciate you asking me the question first. Within the Monday Motorbike spectrum, we wanted people to do the things that they could do on a bicycle, but have it be with a higher powered transportation solution. So cities like San Francisco and Seattle, hills really aren't an issue, whereas on a bicycle or maybe a small scooter may be a little bit more of an issue, just because of the power difference and the ability to carry a higher weight. As such, we try to get into that last mile, mid-range space where you're going between 1 mile and all the way up to 10 miles, where typically on a bicycle that may be a little too much. And what this allows us to do is open up the spectrum of things that you have the capability to do in terms of exploration. So think of when I know my fiance and I are driving around, we see something that's really interesting. We want to stop. But when we're in our car, specifically in LA, we're driving around for a half hour. We have to think, should we spend this $10 to go in there and find parking right down the street? Do we spend a half hour looking for the parking? With our bikes, we have the capability of stopping and just parking on the sidewalk at the bike rack, which is most important to us. But there's some groups that don't have the necessity for bike racks. So.
It's a really good point, and I think the study that you're referring to was an experiment done in the center city of Madrid this past Christmas season, where they restricted car access to the downtown. And during that month-long period, air pollution dropped by about 70%, but still, people shopped at a higher rate. Actual income for local stores was 9.5% higher than it had been the previous Christmas time. So what we're seeing is a real resource for people to get around, and really restricting cars does not inhibit urban behaviors. Would you agree, David?
Yeah, what you see particularly is to explore a town and to really get to know it, there's really nothing like doing it on a scooter or a bike. The first time I came to Austin was actually last year, too late in life, but by the time I got here, Bird scooters were here, and I came here because of that. And how did I see Austin for the very first time? I hopped on a scooter, and I explored a bunch of neighborhoods, and it was an amazing way to get to know the neighborhood and to go to shops that I otherwise wouldn't have gotten to, where it may have been difficult to park, where I just would have maybe taken a Lyft or an Uber directly to that point and then sort of parachuted back out of there. And Netflix actually did an episode looking at this, found that in Memphis, after Bird launched in Memphis, they interviewed some folks and they found that there were some people in parts of town where there was not a lot of racial mixing. There's a bit of a racial divide in Memphis, and people seem to stay on their different parts of town, but there was an African-American theater owner on one side of town, and he said when the scooters showed up, all of a sudden, a bunch of white folks started to show up. For the very first time, people were cruising around town, and they found new things, and it brought people together in ways they hadn't been before.
That's a really great point, and that segues nicely into our next question, which is the diversity of scooter users. Are you seeing a mix of income and gender usage on scooters?
Yeah, what we're seeing is from the data that's in so far, it's probably the broadest spectrum of usage when you consider the various modes. If you consider, say, Lyft and Uber and scooters and bicycles. We found that, so our usage is a fairly evenly mixed between men and women. And in many communities, it's one of the most affordable forms of transportation you can get conveniently. And so it spans across racial boundaries. And essentially in the downtown areas, even in different age groups, people of all ages are using scooters to get that first and last mile in particular.
That's fantastic. So as you might know, at the NYU Rudin Center, we focus on, one of our areas of focus is gender and transportation. And we have found that City Bike, which is the docked bike share system in New York City, only supports 20% female rides. That 80% of trips are taken by men on City Bike, and that's a pretty similar number to what's also happening in Chicago, Boston, and DC. Most of the reasoning for that is that women report not feeling safe on these modes, and both physical safety and then also attire is a preventive factor. So are you seeing, Josh, are you seeing a greater diversity of users in terms of gender in your usage on Monday Motorbikes?
I mean, the short answer is yes, but I think the deeper question is why. So our whole goal was approachability, and I can automatically make the leap over with regards to like companies like Bird, where it's like, well, it's lightweight, you can get on and wear any attire, and all you gotta do is just have a leg that kicks. And by the hands that we're raising, I see just a huge mixture and diversity, which is what South by Southwest is about anyway, of people who've all experienced what it's like to be on these two wheels. So we were surprised as well. We have a higher than average rate of ownership from females. And we asked that question. We would call them specifically and say, hey, why did you choose the Monday Motorbikes Gen 7, which is our flagship product? And why wouldn't you choose Vespa? And it wasn't until like the fourth person we asked, we realized that it was kind of an inherently sexist question. Not something that we had originally thought of. We need to be more appropriate and thoughtful about as time went on. But the response was, hey, listen, we're female, we want to feel powerful. We're kind of tired of being bubblegum, bubbly, and cutesy. We want to feel confident and powerful, and this is something that exudes that pride and personal style that I've been looking for with the approachability factor for my size. And so we were blown away by that, and that they would be willing to come in and be part and really take the dive. So as we come into designing an urban transportation solution specifically, I think there's going to be a lot of things that we're going to find on that gender, racial, income divide spectrum that we found that we didn't realize were existing before.
That's a great point, and something that we also studied at NYU deals with something we call the pink tax, which was a survey based on New Yorkers on public transportation, and showed that about 3/4 of women's responses, or self-identifying femmes, had experienced some sort of harassment or theft while on public transportation. And when we dove in a bit more, a lot of these women said, you can make the subway as safe as you want, but I still have to get home from the subway. And these safety issues really prevent women from participating in the economy, especially late night roles like janitorial or bartending or other work with irregular shifts. So I think what you guys present is a really interesting last mile solution, because although we want everyone to walk everywhere, as we said earlier, it may not be the answer when you're in a vulnerable situation. Is that something that you're finding with Bird, that it's becoming a great last mile solution?
Yeah, we see that we complement public transportation and other modes of transportation. And essentially, the more other modes of transportation that you have available other than just owning and using your own car, the more people tend to rely on all of them. So we find that if people really want to give up their car, they do so when they can rely on Lyft and Uber when they need to, when they can rely on mass transit when they need to, and then when they can rely on a Bird or a bike when they need to. And you raise a really important issue when it comes to street safety and street design, and that's something we really want to talk about here today as well, is the Vision Zero movement and what cities around the world have been trying to do, some of them with much more effort than others, like the city of Copenhagen in Denmark since the 1970s, has put enormous effort into developing safe street designs, bicycle superhighways, to very intentionally get people to shift modes and to get people to feel that level of safety.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought up Vision Zero, because right now we're seeing a spike in pedestrian deaths across the United States. Every 80 minutes, a pedestrian is killed. And that is clearly not always by cars that were in the right of way or pedestrians not being safe. There's a real hazard to the American addiction to cars. I'm wondering what, Josh, you might be doing in order to preserve the physical safety of people using scooters or bikes or other modes in order to keep them safe from cars and also maintain a divide among pedestrians to keep them safe as well.
Well, if you think about the endeavor we were trying to do, we're trying to create this electric motorbike that had a very low barrier to ridership. Not a barrier to entry, but a barrier to ridership. When we did our analysis, we found there were 6 core reasons to people not adopting a motorcycle or scooter. And so when we designed our product from the ground up, we said, here are the core reasons why. Safety was one, safety concerns is like the number one. Seat height is another one. Ease of use and operation is another one. And for us, we put about 2,000 demo rides with people all around the San Francisco Bay Area, and we took all that feedback to help us drive this 7th generation product to really make sure that it was extremely safe and also extremely approachable while still having that motorcycle-like experience of the thrill and fun of 2 wheels. And you know, what we did is we built in systems that allowed you to create different power outputs. So, you know, one has a 200 watt output, which is a very low power output, and then a 500 watt output, and then a 5,500 watt output. And all of that is able to be toggled through your system on the bike. It's all done through software, so we don't have to change anything mechanically. Very similar to how Bird is able to geofence. And I'm sorry to steal your thunder, Dave. That's a really great move. We have to think about ways where we can still provide the fun and thrill of what you really want your vision to be, as our company was, and at the same time make it safe and approachable. But I want to turn that over to you, Dave. How do you feel about the safety concerns of your scooters and geofencing? And before you talk about that, I don't know if we've mentioned, but during our discussion here, you can jump onto slido.com and use the hashtag South by Southwest, and then load in the Hilton Salon H screen so that you can ask questions as we're having our discussions. And then with about 15 minutes left, we'll take the time to answer those questions directly, or as directly as we can. So, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we actually wanted to announce here today something new that we're doing. It's called the Streets for All Coalition. And we actually have a slide of it if we can bring it up. And the purpose of the Streets for All Coalition, which Monday Motorbikes and Bird are joining, along with a number of other industry players, some environmental organizations, and other alternative transit groups. The purpose of this coalition is to address the safety question straight on. During our year of service, a lot of questions have come up about the safety of scooters. Are they safe? And ironically, the focus of those questions has often come up when a car may be the cause of the injury. And when the car is the cause of the injury, the author of a newspaper article might ask, doesn't this raise questions about the safety of scooters? And we say, doesn't it raise the question about the safety of cars? Because currently, the number of deaths is increasing every year, partly because of distracted driving. Last year, there were about 40,000 deaths as a result of cars. Over 4.5 million serious injuries as a result of cars. Over 6,000 pedestrians killed because of cars. So think about that. Streets have been designed to let cars move quickly. Streets have not been designed to allow other modes of transportation to transit safely. What the Streets for All Coalition is about changing that. So we want to work with cities for smart policies to help them do what they've really wanted to do for a long time, but they haven't had the political will to do so far because there hasn't been enough demand. So if you talk to, say, Salita Reynolds, who heads LADOT, Salita Reynolds is deeply dedicated to getting people on bikes and micromobility. And she really wants to put a smart system of protected bike lanes in throughout Los Angeles. However, when she tries to do so, there's been a bunch of political backlash saying we don't want to take a lane away from cars. Well, if we can muster the political will, and now we gain enough critical mass of all of these people on these other shared modes of transportation, perhaps we can finally get more protected lanes to keep people safe. Yep.
That's great. And the Coalition for All is a coalition of how many organizations?
We have, is it up on the board over here, or did we get it up? We've got about 8 organizations. There's Bird, there's Spin, there's Razor, there's Monday Motorbikes, Climate Action, Bike More. Oh, there it is. We're really excited that we've gotten independent groups such as CalBike, and this is a really interesting thing. We've had an evolution of our relationship with bike organizations. At first, a year ago, when scooters came along, they did look at it somewhat suspiciously, and they tried to figure out, are these friend or foe? Because a lot of the bike movement is about using human power and getting exercise. But we saw that we have way more in common that separates us. What we have in common is we need mode shift, and we're working together to create mode shift.
So where do you start with this coalition? Do you start with a certain city or a certain initiative? How do you get started?
What we're doing is we're starting by looking at specifically at city and state policies. So far, city and state policies really favor the automobile. And if you look at, well, what does that mean? It means that in many cities, if you want to build, say, a new supermarket, the zoning requirements actually require you, the builder, to put enough parking there. Because the assumption is the only way you're going to get there is by car. It starts with many cities have free parking. They encourage you to come into town and park for free. There's a term called the freeway, where people who drive cars are not really paying for what is required to support the car. Now, and then came shared transportation, Lyft and Uber. When Lyft and Uber came around, cities started initially by treating it like taxis and wanted to impose a bunch of really rigid taxi laws. But what happened is Lyft and Uber very successfully got policy moved to states. When it got moved to states, it took away all of the city rights in most states to regulate them. That means that here in the city of Austin, even though Lyft and Uber are massively using city resources and clogging city streets, even though it's a service we all enjoy, they're not paying for it. The city can't charge them anything like a congestion tax because the policy has been taken away from them. Now, ironically, the cities can charge for bike share and scooter share, and they are. What we want to do is we want to advocate for looking at this fairly and saying, hey, cities, maybe we should be able to switch this. And hey, states, maybe we should take another look at your policies and allow cities to actually have policies that encourage clean micromobility and put the appropriate costs on cars and anything that's going to clog the street.
That's a great point. And what's especially interesting is this is actually quantifying the amount of wear and tear and air pollution caused by these excessive uses of city streets and kind of building a platform of activity on top of city streets without a built-in compensation. Now, do you see that similarly within Monday Motorbikes? And what is your interest in the coalition?
I think one of the things that excites me the most is we've created something that can go in the bike lane, can ride in a city street, and can park on a sidewalk. There's a lot of utility that you can do in a package that feels like a cafe racer. And what we found is that as you're riding, you're traversing a lot quicker than someone who's pedaling a bicycle, which means that if you want to take an extra 10 or 15 minutes to go explore your city, it's kind of fun to do it. Like being a kid again, where you're like, hey, look over there, let's go. And you bring all your buddies. And when you're in the bike lane, next thing you know, you take a left and you realize there's no bike lane anymore. And now you're in the middle of the street, and then you see a bunch of other cyclists out there who are also in the middle of the street, but they're doing that commute every day. And so when we looked at this, we said, why aren't these people saying, this is pretty dangerous. I got cars on the left going 45 miles an hour, and I've got cars on the right that are going 0 miles an hour that have doors that just open up kind of like whack-a-moles that just pop up every once in a while. Like we'll see what happens. Maybe I'll get hit, maybe I'll dodge it. And when we looked, we realized that they were trying to get these specific lanes to try and help their own personal safety, but they didn't have enough critical mass to get that pushed through. And so when David and I talked about the coalition and the original thought behind it, 100% we got behind that. Because as a company our size, we'll do about 4,000 units this year in output. But there are millions upon millions upon millions of bicyclists who still couldn't get that done. And so if we can all come together and create that critical mass, then I think that not only will we be able to create bike lanes, but also doing the same things that countries like Denmark, Copenhagen specifically, have been able to do in terms of implementing things like bike superhighways and local legislation that helps that micromobility aspect. So that's why we're so interested and excited to be part of it.
That's a great point. And one key aspect from the coalition that I was particularly interested in is the concept of data sharing, which is somewhat controversial, but I think you've expressed a kind of commitment to sharing data through this coalition to improve transportation. Would you say that's correct?
What you see is that cities need help persuading, so DOTs are not elected officials. So if we go again to our friend Salita Reynolds, she's not an elected official and she can't go sway public opinion. But she really wants more bike lanes. Well, to get more bike lanes, she needs the politicians to get behind it, and she needs the people to get behind it. So there needs to be a big public push for this. Well, how do you get a big public push for it? The best tool we have is data. If I arm the city with data about all of the tens of millions of scooter rides that are happening and where they're happening, Salita Reynolds can walk in to the mayor and say, look, on this thoroughfare, if we do another bike lane here, we're going to significantly reduce traffic, because look at all the scooter and bike traffic that's already happening there. And by the way, it's not that safe because they're currently mixing on, say, a 25-mile-per-hour road, yet these scooters and bikes are going 15 to 20. Let's put a protected bike lane here, and that's really going to improve things in our city. So we actually want, so unlike issues of the past where there have been questions about whether the TNCs would want to share data, we do want to share data. What's really, really important, though, is to keep privacy. So individual users and consumers do not want their personally identifiable information shared with cities on where are they going. And so we want to work very, very closely with cities to get them the data they need for planning, but make sure that we're protecting the privacy of riders.
That's fantastic. I'm wondering, and this is touching on the kind of top upvoted question from Slido right now, is that assuming we see great successes from this coalition, which I hope we do, and we get people out of their cars, we get cities don't become kind of car storage as they are now, will we see this overwhelming congestion of micromobility modes like we see in many cities in China, where there are kind of these discarded piles of shared mobility vehicles on the sidewalks, and it's become kind of the Wild West of micromobility. How do we keep the how do we invest in the innovation and invest in the new exciting modes without overwhelming our cities?
So a couple of things have made it different here. One is that the vehicle that's really been, that's really taken off here is the pedal assist e-bike and the electric scooter, both of which cost a fair amount to put into service and to maintain. When you think about that, we do not have an economic interest to put thousands of these out on the street that don't get used. So we have a really strong incentive to match supply with demand. And then we're working directly with cities also so that they can put appropriate levers in place to help control supply and demand. Now, at the same time, in a number of cities, even where we have high usage, issues do arise of, well, are there too many scooters in one location, and how well are they being parked, and are people riding too much on sidewalks? And that's where it comes back to the infrastructure question. And so that's where we're working with cities like Santa Monica, which is now drawing new little rectangles, either on the street with some protective cones around it, or on the sidewalk, and we're starting to incentivize people to park there. And as they're developing new bike lanes, we'll get people off of the sidewalks and into the bike lanes. So when you think about those two issues, those are the two big issues that we see in cities all over, and I'm sure you guys have seen that. Are the vehicles being parked well where you see them, and are people riding on sidewalks or in the street? And then we have a lot of cities like here in Austin where the city leaders actually say, hey, we actually want people to ride on sidewalks for now, because we have wide sidewalks. In some cases, they're underutilized by pedestrians, and we just don't have enough bike lanes now, and that's what we need to fix.
We should start a coalition.
Let's start a coalition.
On our
side, I was just going to add to that really quick. So for those of us who haven't traveled internationally, so for the last couple of months, like last 4 months, I spent 2 months in China, Shanghai specifically. And one of the things that you found out there is that there's these really big bike share companies. Ofo was one of them. And it became this really big boom where all of a sudden people said, oh my gosh, we can use these bikes, but we can rent them. Now we don't have to take care of them. We just pull up our phone, we scan it, and we're set, and whatever. And there was a lot of cash that was being, pulled into these piles, but what else was piling up were bikes. And it turned out that the cost to repair a damaged product was more than it was to produce a brand new one. And so people just started throwing them in the back of trucks. You saw these small mountains of rusting materials. As a company that is really focused on sustainability, nothing made me more angry. And that's probably taking it pretty lightly to say, oh, hey, we're trying to decongest things and make the environment better. By the way, check out this pile of garbage over here we've created in the pursuit of dollars. Monday Motorbikes takes a stance that says, like, hey, we want to create a really high quality premium product. We don't want to throw thousands of them out there. Could we do it? Yes. But is that the right thing to do? No, we don't. We just want to really focus on high quality premium experience and kind of like the Ducati of motorbikes. Take that, Ducati. So I think that's really the hardest part, is that when you go to China and you come back to the United States and see companies like Bird or Scoot or Lime with their products, it's the number of available units out there is extremely or way far less than what is out there in China. But I think it's a responsible number for now. I mean, you guys have all the data. But if you look out in China, you see these tens of thousands of unutilized units, and it just breaks my heart. So anyway, if you're interested, look it up. I mean, there's Ofo, just look up Ofo pile of crappy bikes. And it'll pull it up for you.
Can you expand a bit on, is that the primary reason that you chose to go for a private adoption model rather than a shared model?
Yes and no. So what we realized is that if we want to go to a rental model, like a public, use rideshare type of model, we had to have something that was lower cost. And our first bike, actually, we used 8 DeWalt drill batteries to power it. It didn't go very far. But it proved the concept that we could make something that had the meaningful speed and range. And as we were designing, we realized that we could make something that exuded what we wanted to experience as motorcycle riders, but let people experience it without that high barrier to ridership, at the cost of not being able to build a ton of them. And so we made the conscientious decision to move direct to consumer. Our original bike we sold on Indiegogo, we broke a record on Indiegogo for the highest priced item ever fully funded at the time. And we were selling for $6,000. Now, we were still out of a garage at that time, so it was like hand built by highly overqualified individuals. And now we've moved to that mass production piece. And for us, we're most excited about being able to provide a premium product. Can we scale it out as fast as, say, like a Bird or an Uber? No. But what we like about this is a type of product that you can use for 5, 10 years and not have any of the potential issues that like maybe OFO had when they put their bikes out there. And I'm sure quality, I mean, you tell me, is quality a really big thing within the Bird spectrum for scooters, and why rental versus buy?
Mm-hmm. Well, what we see is it's an interesting question about how the business started and where it's going for scooters. So how it started was, of course, it was just an experiment a year ago. Will people use this? And it's really interesting to see how these companies start, where you just try something. There's the concept of an MVP, a minimally viable product. So what our founder, Travis van der Zanden, did, the other Travis, he went and bought some scooters online from Alibaba. He outfitted them in order to be able to be used with an app, and he put them out in Santa Monica to see would people use them. Now, these were just off-the-shelf products. They weren't made for really industrial scale service. And it turned out that the product took off so quickly that we scaled up. Now, we scaled up with more off-the-shelf products that also were not built for long-lasting service. So what we've seen is the vehicles need to be much, much better. And so now we and others are all creating vehicles that are intended to be much, much longer lasting. The batteries should last much longer. They should have a much more comfortable ride. Things shouldn't break quite as easily. And I think what you'll see over the next, well, it's going to continue for a long time, but this year alone, you're going to see a really great evolution in terms of the quality of the vehicle. And it's going to be really interesting as consumers. You are all very lucky because so many companies want to do this that you're going to have lots of vehicles to choose from. And right now, it feels pretty much like a commodity. You walk out, you find a scooter. They might all be fairly the same. But I do think you're going to see a lot of differentiation coming out in the coming year. We'll all differentiate probably in terms of how we attract you to our product. What is our app? What is our pricing? And then the vehicle itself might be, well, I prefer the Bird vehicle because it has certain qualities that another one doesn't. Or another one, you think it has the right tires or it has a shock absorber or something else. It's going to be really interesting to see the market evolve. But one important factor is, though, we all need to keep cost in line. So these vehicles, they stay out, and you do need to make sure that you can run a profitable business. So that is going to moderate what are the vehicles that are produced by us.
Right, and the other question is seasonality. A lot of the success of micromobility modes has happened in places with fairer climates, but here, and including here in Austin, but in New York, where I'm from, and Chicago, and other places with some terrible weather sometimes, and salt and rain and snow on the streets, how do micromobility modes fare?
You want to take that one first?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think we're both in the same boat, and if you look around the world, other countries have been dealing with this. Copenhagen is not a very warm city, it turns out, and neither is Amsterdam. Now, it's really interesting. If you visit Amsterdam, they seem not to notice the rain, or they'll put these big plastic sheets all over themselves and get on bikes. And it's phenomenal to see, no matter how much rain there is, the bike lanes are full in Amsterdam. And now what we found here is that for an electric scooter, a certain amount of precipitation is okay, but at some point there's too much and at some point it's too cold. So there's some cities where you may have a Minneapolis where for 3 months of the year, scooter service doesn't work. And I think that that's something that we're going to keep experimenting with. This is our first big winter as a company. And so we'll figure out what are the right times of year that we can be out really providing service.
And it's fair also to ask cities to respond to the seasonality. Cities already have seasons of services like transit service where they reduce it over the summer when kids are out of school, and they factor in inclement weather in their service provisions. So it is fair to say that transit service can pick up some of the slack, but I do think it's interesting to consider whether people will pack up their motorbike for the winter or if they can still sustain their commute practices without.
Well, we're excited to announce our clear plastic bag, Monday Motorbikes clear plastic bag for the rain. Listen, the way motorcycle and scooter specifically acceptance works and the happiness of the adoption is based on solely the use case, right? So let's take a dirt bike. I'm not going to take a dirt bike from San Francisco to New York on a killer cruise, right? Just like I won't take a cruiser or a cafe racer onto the local trails just to see if I can bomb it, right? It's not going to happen. And so in such a way, you're also looking at these types of mobility, and millennials and Gen Z specifically will look at the available travel options, the time and the dollars available to them, and include weather or the distance needed to be traveled, and all this will culminate in a decision as to the product with which they will choose to transport. With our bike, what we liked about it is we use the same wheelbase and the same wheel size as the world's most popular vehicle, the Honda Super Cub. Right? They made 100 million of these. It made Honda, right? In fact, it started the really cool marketing slogan, "You meet the nicest people in a Honda," which is brilliant. At the end of the day, I think that we as a company see seasonality as something that we can work on reducing the barrier to that issue, but we can't overcome it all. And it's really based upon I think the geography specifically. Like David was saying, you could have the rain go in Copenhagen and no one cares, and in LA, if it's raining, like everybody's freaking out, driving like 3 miles an hour, or Dallas when it gets ice on the ground and people are still doing 60, down 35. Unlike Austin, Austin's the best, right, guys? So that's how we see it. We understand seasonality is there, but I think at the end of the day, there's things that we can do as organizations being new to the industry that we can help reduce the overall effects of seasonality.
There's one thing that we're working on which we think addresses this, which is multimodal cards. So if you integrate in cities with their public transit systems in a multimodal card, and then if we get included in, say, a commuter tax-free benefit where, for instance, you may have a commuter tax-free benefit from your company where they give you something like $200 tax-free a month that allows you to use that for whatever the qualifying forms of transportation are. So if we, for instance, get included in that, and now your company says, here's $200 to use every month, no matter how you want to use it, and then we integrate with, say, the local modes of transportation. So you have one card, and depending on the day, well, it's raining outside. Today I'm going to take the trolley. It's not raining outside today. Today I'm going to take a bird, et cetera. We think that's going to be a very flexible way for people to handle seasonality.
That's such a good point, and that's a kind of new trend picking up in many European cities, and it's starting to gain interest here. It's called mobility as a service, where you have one central point where you can access different modes. And actually, the greatest beneficiaries, I think, of mobility as a service are women, because women tend to take shorter trips throughout cities. And they do something called trip chaining, which is several shorter trips. They might go to work, then to pick up kids at school, then to the grocery store. And this is based on national studies across the United States, that this trip chaining tends to happen with women, and having mobility as a service would allow them a central price point rather than having to have a transit card, a membership to their local bike share, plus pay out of pocket for scooters. Instead, they can take the kind of right match for the trip at that time. So I think it's something we should all be advocating for in our cities in terms of the future of urban transportation. And in New York, we have 28 modes of transportation. We should be able to choose what the right match is for us at that time. I want to move to audience questions right now. We have a lot of enthusiasm for the question about liability. The question is, cities don't have infrastructure to allow scooters to operate safely and not interfere with pedestrians, bikes, or cars. How are you dealing with liability? And I want to interrupt for a minute, and that's a question from Gio. I want to interrupt for a minute, which is my favorite tweet on this subject of scooters being hazardous to pedestrians is, and I don't remember who tweeted this, but it was, if you think scooters are dangerous, wait until you see cars.
Yeah.
That's, it's a really interesting look at how many injuries and fatalities occur from scooters rather than cars. So on that note, David, can you talk about liability?
Well, what we see for starters is when you look at the rate of injuries of people riding scooters, and we have tens of millions of rides, what we see is if you compare the rate of injury that we've seen versus the rate of injury from published data on bikes, it's pretty similar. And so we see that the scooter itself doesn't create a higher incidence rate than biking does. There are many more scooters now because it's become so popular. But in terms of the incident rate, it's about the same. Now, many cities actually do have good infrastructure, and many cities don't have good infrastructure. What we want to do is work with cities to bring them all up to par, because what's really being pointed out is a lot of cities have not caught up. And they've never really had the reason to catch up because there hasn't been this push. There's been an occasional bike traveling down a bike lane, and a lot of cities think it's a complete waste of money to put in more bike lanes. So now finally, we have a reason for cities to work on creating safer streets for people. So I think that's the most important thing. Now, from a liability perspective, what matters is, well, how did the injury occur? If a person is riding a scooter and gets hit by a car, the injury is caused by the person who hit them with a car. And it's just like if we get into a car accident and I hit you, I'm liable to you. And the same would be true if I'm driving my car and I hit you. Then there's the question of things like potholes. And who should be liable for potholes? Well, there's a really good impetus for cities to be fixing potholes. Because we think that, for instance, on my walk here today, I saw a lot of potholes. And it would be great if those got fixed. Now, in terms of if I'm riding a scooter down a sidewalk and I hit a person, there again, it's easy to assign under basic tort law who's liable. I'm riding the scooter, I hit you. It's exactly the same as if I were riding a bike and I hit you. So the existing tort law structure works very well for scooters.
Yes, and of course, there are bad actors in every situation, and some scooter users, as the next audience question alludes to, act in bad faith with scooters. They throw them into lakes, or they otherwise behave badly. They clutter the sidewalk. They smear the handlebars with something sticky. What is Bird doing to educate customers?
Mm-hmm. So we're working with cities in creating education campaigns. So in a lot of cities, we have outdoor advertising campaigns about scooter safety and scooter etiquette. And within the app, we train people. But you can't solve all of the bad behavior that happens from people who are not using the scooters. And this is what we saw as the major problem, for instance, when we launched in San Francisco. The biggest problem wasn't necessarily people riding the scooters. The biggest problem was the people not riding the scooters and throwing them into lakes and damaging the scooters. One thing that can be experimented with is locks, and that's happening in San Francisco and in some other places. If locks are widely adopted, and if they're seamless enough that it doesn't really make it more difficult, it doesn't create too much friction, that can be, I think, a pretty darn good solution to creating an orderly system of vehicles locked to bike racks. It will actually spur cities to put many, many more bike racks in cities for orderly parking. And as long as the vehicle is locked, it's a lot harder to pick it up and throw it somewhere.
You saw the same thing so I lived in San Francisco in 2008, which it was taxi time, right? If I needed to get around, there was no Bird, there was no Lime, there was no Monday Motorbikes, it was taxis. And you're like, you'd call the operator and you're like his buddy, pretending, you know, hey man, good to hear you. I need a yellow cab, you know, hook it up. And he's like, yeah, it'll be there when it's there, bye, you know. And that was it. And then Uber came along.
They would say 5 minutes.
Yeah, yeah, and I'd call my office, but guys, I'm running late, but don't worry, taxi's on the way. They're like, yeah, sure.
25 minutes later.
Yeah. And so at the end of the day, when Uber came around, it was like, holy crap, there is this really cool offering where now I can go ahead and give that driver 1 star because he was being a jerk, or I can give him 5 stars, he was doing awesome, and I know where they're at, and all these things erupted. Well, now all of a sudden you had these Uber drivers who were getting their cars vandalized by taxi drivers because they were really upset that there was this new thing that was coming out. And when innovation comes out, there will always be detractors. There will always be the old guard that's going to try and stop you from doing the things that you want to go do to innovate. So, you know, again, since I'm in the space, I see this happen all the time where people will just push a scooter over. And it's like, you know, great, did that make you feel better? You know, we can sit down and talk about it, or maybe we can scoot over somewhere and talk about it. And, you know, much in the same way we see our thing as well. It's classified as a Class 2 federal bicycle, or federally Class 2 electric bicycle. And people go, no, you know, that's crazy. It's like, well, listen, we looked at the laws, we understand the laws, we're going to follow the laws, and we're going to push the envelope to innovate. And it's the same thing that David's doing in putting these things out there, helping these cities understand their infrastructure is lacking, and help them get up to par. So all that to say that I see that there's issues with safety. I see that there's people throwing these things into lakes. I think it's a sign of the times that the old guard will always be upset about it. And I think it's just going to be a passing fad that will go away within the next year or two.
And there's things we can do in the meantime. So for instance, we've actually put something in our app that allows you, as somebody who is not riding a scooter, to report bad scooter riding or parking. So you can actually see a person coming down the street towards you while you're walking on the sidewalk on a scooter. You can pull open the Bird app. You can hit this button. It's a little caution triangle. And it'll actually open up the map, and it'll show a scooter coming toward you on the map. You can tap it, and you can report that rider. And what we want to do is we want to integrate with cities so that that becomes a forum where we're doing our job and trying to help report bad riding. And then we also want to work with law enforcement, because just like law enforcement has created officers who go around and do ticketing for cars, now that there's this new mode of transportation, law enforcement should have its role. So we think it's fully appropriate for law enforcement to go walk on sidewalks in those cities where they want to get scooters off sidewalks, and they should ticket people.
Right. It's similar to if somebody were driving a Ford car drunk, you wouldn't go after Ford, you'd go after the driver.
Right. Exactly. Same with Hertz Rent-A-Car. Hertz Rent-A-Car they don't have liability for the fact that somebody rents their car and creates a lot of problems when they rent the Hertz Rent-A-Car.
Right. So with this growth and popularity of scooters, the next question, which has several upvotes, asks about serving underserved neighborhoods farther away from downtown. You know, we tend to think of scooters as serving dense urban walkable districts for these shorter trips. But how about reaching neighborhoods that are a little farther away? Is it working? And is it possible to sustain an adequate number to serve the interested public?
So what we need is public-private partnership in that. Cities that are now putting permits in place are largely requiring an equity component, which says we need you to serve some underserved areas, and we want to serve those underserved areas. What we want to do is work with the cities so that the cities themselves have some skin in the game, and they're actually engaged with subsidizing. So to the extent that cities say, hey, here's an area that needs service, we should work with them, and we should be honest with them and say, we can or we cannot service this area in a way that allows us to conduct an economically viable business. Because at the end of the day, there's this huge difference between the way cities have always provided transportation and now these private companies. The private company can't exist if it's constantly operating at a loss. We're operating a great service, but the business will go away if we're operating at a loss. So in these areas where it's not possible to operate in an economically viable way, let's partner with the cities so that the cities are contributing so that we can offer service.
Great. And Josh, I wonder if that's where you might come in. What's the typical range of trips on Monday Motorbikes? Is it someone who lives, say, 5 miles outside of downtown?
What we're finding is that the average one-way trip is about 4 miles. And our buyers will justify the purchase based upon utility, but when we ask them and really get to the nitty-gritty of it, they're like, it's fun and it looks sexy, you know? And so as we develop that product and we understand who our buyers are, male, female, local geographies, income, things of that nature, we can begin to, as a cloud-based company and an innovative electric vehicle company, we can actually develop new products to try and help sustain or develop new relationships with areas that may be underserved. Today, our bike gets 100 miles in range. So, you know, a public-private partnership may look a lot like the development of a lower cost, higher viable product that can be moved to an urban setting that is less, well, let's call it underserved, and then utilize that along with a private partnership with the buses or like a BART system like in San Francisco Bay Area Rapid Transit. So we can develop new strategies that work along that side, mostly because we started on the high technology side, developing proprietary battery technology, cloud connectivity, meaningful range, and then we can work our way down to the bottom in a helpful way. So yeah, that's something we look at.
Great. In New York, Class 2 e-bikes as well as electric scooters are currently illegal, but on the docket for approval. But along with I'm going to merge the next two audience questions. Do you think New York and other cities are receptive to micromobility changes, this sea change, both from a regulation perspective and from a public interest perspective, and especially in Europe, where the regulations are much stricter?
Well, if you start with Europe, what's really interesting is they're generally much more bicycle-friendly cultures, and so but they're also more legalistic cultures. So if you look at Germany, for example, Germany at the national level is passing new rules for micromobility devices. And what we see happening there is they will pass fairly strict rules for what the device has to be, what safety requirements it has to meet. And then once those device requirements are met, the cities are waiting with open arms to take these. And the cities already have, like Berlin, has massive bike lanes just waiting for these vehicles to come. So we're really, really excited about Europe. And we think once you get past, at the national level, the vehicles being legal, all bets are off, and they're going to be amazing markets for us. New York, so there is a bill in City Council right now to make Class 2 e-bikes and scooters legal, and it has overwhelming support from Council. It reaches a little bit more of a difficult path within the DOT and within the mayor's office, who's trying to balance, well, how does that fit in with other modes? How does that fit in with public transportation? And we want to work with them so that we can get a pilot off the ground. So we're optimistic that sometime in 2019 in New York, we'll get a pilot going.
You'll have to pave over some of those cobblestones in Europe.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I would recommend, though, next time you're in Paris, ride a scooter around Paris, and it's the most amazing way to see Paris.
That's great. And are there cities that either of you have seen doing particularly well with introducing micromobility in a peaceful way?
I think San Francisco and LA are doing really well. I mean, New York is like the complete opposite, and hopefully that bill will change. You can't get a large Coke and you can't ride an electric bicycle in New York. That's what you can't do. But in San Francisco, as an example, they've had Scoot Networks, which was a rental, like Vespa-like scooter. They use Gen Z scooters for a long time, and that's been around for 4 or 5 years. They don't have the scale or push of, say, a bird, but they're really helping push legislation and safety mechanisms, and I think LA is doing a really good job, mostly because California's on the forefront of the innovation, and I think that's a pretty big thing for us. And with regards to Europe, we'll just have to make something that's registerable. You know, that's not something we can bypass.
Well, I'd want to give some extra props to LA, because the big difference between San Francisco and LA is LA really wants to solve its traffic problem. Both of the cities have very ambitious plans that they've published about solving the traffic problems. LA has put dramatically more energy into solving it. And if you look at the way San Francisco has taken in these micromobility offerings, they have created programs, but they've really limited the numbers of vehicles that they've allowed. And so, for instance, if you do walk around downtown San Francisco, it's really hard to find one of the vehicles. So now they may have more of a problem in that they don't have enough bike lanes available, but LA is really at the forefront.
Yeah, and Mayor Eric Garcetti is the best mayor on transportation in this country right now. So if you're interested in this subject, I highly recommend you follow his movements on this, because he's really committed to bringing LA and the rest of the country into the future of urban transportation. So unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this panel. And
Can I give one shout out? I'm sorry.
Of course.
Mayor Adler here in Austin, because we're here in Austin.
Yes.
It would be terrible if we left without thanking him.
Yes,
He's been a huge champion of micromobility. When we launched here a year ago, he brought everybody to the table. He helped quickly get a set of rules in place. And he's largely responsible for the fact that we have all of these scooters and bikes out here today.
Wow. That's fantastic.
Thank you, Mayor Adler.
So thank you all for your time and attention, and thank you to Josh and David for your insights.
Yeah, thanks for coming, everybody.
Thank you.